Hey everyone, Cleva here, and today we're talking about the books that I read in the month of May. The month of May is a little bit of a mixed bag. It was a month in which I read quite a few books, but I also had quite a few DNFs within the month. But at the other end, I also potentially have my favorite book of the year so far within this month. But so, without further ado, let's just dive in. There will be 3 numbers on the screen at all time. My TBR, which was at 15 at the beginning of the month. My credit system, which was at 21 at the beginning of the month. For each physical book that I finished, I get an extra credit. And then my books read, which was at 0 at the beginning of the month. It will climb throughout this video, and also when I have a DNF, it also still counts as a book read. In the month of May, I will first start off by talking about 4 books that I'm not going to really talk about aside from that within this video. So these are books that I read for the BookTube prize. I was judging the translated fiction section of the BookTube prize, and I will have 2 vlogs go up for that. The first one will be up on the 10th, the other one on the 17th, and so it documents my experience with those books, and in that one I go into quite some depth about these books. So the books are Goethe, The Art of Losing, Heaven, and My Heart. So these 4 books I read within the month of May, but I won't say anything more about them within this video. Moving on more or less in order of what I read throughout the month, the very first thing that I finished was The Discord of Gods by Jen Lyons' 5th and final book in A Chorus of Dragons. A Chorus of Dragons is a series that starts off with the perspective of a boy called Kieran, who grew up in the slums and who turns out to be more than he thought he was. He turns out to have a sort of like link to royalty that he was unaware of, and there might be some prophecy linked to him as well. So this is a very interesting series in which structure is used to its benefit, in my opinion. So all of these books are reports being drafted towards somebody who is inhabiting this world to tell them about experiences that have taken place in the past few months, years, or whatever. And in the report itself, we will hear from multiple perspectives as they alternate narrating their own story. Now, this structure can be kind of complex, and because this is always a report drafted for somebody who is actually inhabiting this world, there is no hand-holding taking place neither, so it can be quite confusing to get the full story, to get the full history, the full context, because you are not spoon-fed them. There is no exposition within this series, for example. So that can be a little bit difficult, but it is also very enjoyable. I enjoy that a whole lot. I really like being put into the middle of a story like that and kind of having to figure out as we're going along what is actually happening. I don't really like that it's spelled out too much for me. So if you like that, then this series can definitely be for you. Aside from that, it's very diverse. There's a whole lot of LGBTQIA plus characters. I mean, most of the characters are queer. There's a ton of plot elements happening in this world. There are dragons, there's reincarnations, there's prophecies that are indicated, there's a mimic, there's soul swapping, it's a fun ride. I absolutely love this series, and The Discord of Gods, while not my favorite book within the series, is a very satisfying ending to the series, and I definitely think that Jen Lyons managed to wrap up what needed to be wrapped up. She managed to bring together the most important plot points and wrap those up in a very satisfactory way. And I very much appreciate that this book sheds so much light on elements that have been there all along, and they might feel kind of random in the moments in which you're reading about them in book 1, but reading about them in book 5 you see that there was a plan all along. There was something happening in the background that now makes sense to you. So I very much appreciate those types of conclusions. Next up, a completely different book, and that is On the Come Up by Angie Thomas. So this is a YA novel. Our protagonist Bree is this young girl who wants to become a rapper. Her father was a rapper, however he was shot when she was still a young girl. Her mother is now taking care of her and her brother as a single parent. However, money is definitely tight, and so Bree definitely knows what it's like to go without. Her mother also is recovering from a drug addiction, so these elements of her past definitely have an impact on her personality and on the way that she acts. She definitely has abandonment issues, for example. But so throughout this book we'll kind of see how she wants to become a rapper and how she is very much an outspoken person who knows what to say and isn't afraid to speak her mind. However, that also puts a certain image on her. It means that people perceive her as being aggressive, as disrespectful, and so she definitely has to struggle with her image, the way that she portrays herself, and being true to herself, because trying to break into the rap scene, she also starts to feel like she needs to put up a facade, like she needs to become a gangster almost, like she needs to pretend like she's a gangster in any case, because that's the type of things that she hears rappers rap about. And there's definitely a certain character within her entourage at a certain point in the book that will try to steer her image in a certain direction, and so the book is very much about that sort of conflict between, you know, wanting to reach the top and needing to reach the top, or feeling like you need to reach the top because you want to be able to support the people around you, you want better circumstances. However, how much of yourself do you compromise in the process? How true to yourself can you stay within that entire road to fame, basically? I highly enjoyed this one. Angie Thomas is really great at writing characters and at writing character dynamics. Not just the family dynamics. The family dynamics are also great, but you know, the friendship dynamics are also amazing within this one. It really is like a page turner. I read through this one really quickly, and I'm very excited to also read her other work, Concrete Rose. I think that is the only work by her that I haven't read yet, but I really enjoy these books a whole lot. Next up we have And the Mountains Echoed by Khaled Hosseini. It feels like I only just finished it, so I kind of feel like this is not in the correct order, and I am completely correct about that. One sec. So the correct next book in the order is S by J.J. Abrams. This is also a book within a book. So the book within a book would be Ship of Theseus. And then something just fell out, and I haven't done anything with this while reading this book because I didn't get very far into this book neither. So this is a sort of like multi-layered book. I will give you one page as an example. So this book contains a book within itself, so Ship of Theseus, which is the last book of a sort of mysterious author. This book got published, but the final chapter, I think, is either missing or it is reinterpreted by his translator. Nobody knows the identity of the author, and then the translator will be giving his comments within the footnotes of the work, and then within the margins of this particular copy, two readers will be discussing the work, who they believe is the person who wrote these books, but also we will get the world of the margins is kind of expanded, as we learned that one of the readers, for example, was doing research into the author, and we learn about his sort of like academic superior and, you know, some power dynamics between there. There are many layers to this text, and you're supposed to in some point use this thing to crack a code, but I never figured that out. But as I said, I didn't get very far. I think I got like 70 pages in. The problem with this one is the many different layers. That's what drew me into this book, but in the end, I just couldn't focus on any layer. I just felt like I was reading but not taking anything in. And it's not necessarily that I really wasn't taking anything in, but it was just taking so much focus to read all these different levels and to be able to still keep an overview of what was going on within a story, for example. I felt like the story within the story, so the novel itself, was really getting lost and was really just there for, you know, no purpose except for the purpose of having the people in the margin read that. But then why am I reading this book if it doesn't really serve a purpose? And so I was really getting lost within the different layers of this book. And so I looked up at some reviews, and so there are quite a lot of people who absolutely love this one, and so it can be a great experience for the right reader. But there were definitely some readers who were complaining about the exact same things that I was complaining about, and more specifically, they were also saying that it didn't really pay out neither in the end, because a lot of this book seems to create some sort of a tension. You kind of feel like something will happen at some point to these readers, to these people within the margin, and apparently that's not really the case. So at that point in time, I was like, in that case, it's really not worth it for me, and so I might as well put it down, because I couldn't. I read, reading 10 pages in this felt like reading 100 pages in another book, you know, and so I wasn't getting any of the payout for it. So I'm very sad. I had really high hopes for this one because I really expected this one to be a 5-star read. Yeah, and it didn't pan out like that. But yeah, I'd rather put it down early on than waste all my time on it and still feel that disappointed. Time for the DNFs, I guess. Another DNF, Emperor of the Eight Islands by Leon Hearn. This is Japanese-inspired fantasy. Leon Hearn is not Japanese herself, but she has studied Japanese culture and things like that. I think she was a professor maybe of it as well and lived there for a very long time. Emperor of the Eight Islands, I didn't necessarily have much against it, but the writing style is like very detached. Kind of feels like a writing style that you would read an epic poem in, for example, or like a fairy tale or something like that. So a very detached style that doesn't put much emotion into its story, or that doesn't really build a bond to the character. And I'm very much a character-focused reader, so I didn't really feel like I cared about what was happening to these people. And so at some point I was like, you know what? I'm not disliking what I'm listening to because I was listening to the audiobook, but I'm also not getting anything out of this. So basically in this one we were following Shikanoko, I think his name was. The series is called The Tale of Shikanoko. So we were following Shikanoko, which was not his original name at the beginning of the story. Basically he was abandoned by his uncle. His uncle tried to kill him, and then he basically pretended like he had been killed, but he was living in a forest or something like that, and then it turns out to be some sort of a prophesied chosen one person, and he is reborn, not really, but he is reinvented as being Shikanoko, which meant something like the deer god or the deer king or something like that. It has its weird elements. It has some, like, political power grabs and stuff like that. But yeah, ultimately, as I said, I didn't care enough. So now it is time for And the Mountains Echoed by Khaled Hosseini, which is my favorite book of the year so far. I absolutely adored this one. So this one takes place in Afghanistan mostly, but it is very different from his first book by him that I read, which was A Thousand Splendid Suns, which I think I also gave 5 stars to. In this one, there are basically let's say 9 chapters, but each chapter is told from the perspective of a different character. And so in essence, the story kind of seems to center around these 2 characters, Abdullah and his sister Pari, who are immensely close to one another. There's this huge tight-knit bond between the 2 of them, but through circumstances they grow estranged from one another. And so this story and all of the different perspectives will be linked to Abdullah and Pari. We of course get the perspective of both Abdullah and Pari at some point throughout this book, but we also get perspectives from different members of their family, but also, for example, of people who live in a house that used to be owned by a member of their family, for example, or people who are neighbors to members of their extended family. So there can be more loose links between the perspective that we're reading from and Abdullah and Pari. But throughout the chapter, there will be always some moment in which you realize why we are reading from that perspective and what their link is to this particular family. It is beautifully told. I really love that structure. I think the structure is sort of a hit or miss. I feel like a lot of people feel like there are perspectives that we're reading from that they didn't really care about. And I definitely will say that there are maybe like 1 or 2 perspectives that were less interesting to me. But in general, I really enjoyed each perspective, even if the perspective on the whole didn't necessarily have too much to do with Abdullah and Pari's story. I thought that each one of these individual perspectives had an interesting story to tell. Each one of these individual characters was interesting in themselves. And so through this structure, we also got a very wide tapestry of perspectives, a very wide tapestry of Afghan people and Afghan stories. You have stories of people who have lived their entire life in Afghanistan, for example. You have people who have had to go on the run at some point, who were living in refugee camps in Pakistan, for example. You have people who have moved to the US, people who have moved to Paris, for example. So there's a wide variety of perspectives that we're getting that way through this particular structure being used. And what I also really enjoyed a whole lot about this one is that you are getting a whole lot of disabled characters, for example, and one of these perspectives definitely made me cry. So I always am very happy to see disability representation, and within this one we got quite a lot of it. And while we still predominantly see disabled characters in the sidelines or not being the perspective that we're reading from itself, I definitely think we had a wide range of disabled characters and a wide range of disabled narratives. And especially one in particular I absolutely loved and made me cry, because that was very much about disability and acceptance of disability. So yeah, I very much enjoyed this one a whole lot. I think the structure, as I said, can be a hit or miss. It is also not told chronologically as a result. Each perspective is told chronologically, but the timeline between the different perspectives might vary, and so you might be moving back from time to time, moving forward from time to time. So yeah, I just absolutely loved it. Khaled Hosseini is a beautiful writer. This writing style is just absolutely amazing. And sadly, I only have one of his full-length novels to go anymore at this point in time, which is The Kite Runner, which is probably his most famous work. But at this point in time, I cannot see it beating out this one for my favorite book by him. It definitely feels like a little bit of a shame that I'm going to move from And the Mountains Echoed to The Lost World and Other Stories by Sir Arthur Conan Doyle. Don't get me wrong, this is not a DNF, I finished this, but probably I should have DNF'd this at some point. So what I enjoyed about this one, so this is a collection of 5 short stories told from, it's called the Professor Challenger series, but Professor Challenger isn't really our protagonist. Basically, we are reading mainly from the perspective of a journalist who, in the first novella here, in The Lost World, is set on the path of Professor Challenger, who has just returned from Latin America, where he's made a discovery that has kind of made him the mockery of the world. And that discovery is that he found dinosaurs still living there at some sort of an isolated plateau somewhere in Latin America. And so our journalist is going on an expedition to find out whether Professor Challenger was in the right or not. Professor Challenger is a very interesting character. He's a very much hot-tempered, very much full of himself type of professor who kind of is immediately indignant when somebody challenges his beliefs, but at the same time he is constantly mocking people for their beliefs. I found him to be a very unlikable character, but he is definitely a character, and so it's quite fun to read about him. The Lost World is the work in this one that I enjoyed the most. I also quite enjoyed the Disintegration Machine, mainly because it has a really unethical ending to it. Aside from that, I thought the second one was okay. I don't really remember too much about the second. Yeah, now I remember. Second one was okay. Then we have Land of Mist, which I thought was so damn boring, which is all about ghosts, basically, spiritualism. Apparently Sir Arthur Conan Doyle at some point lost his wife and his child, I believe, and then he became very much interested and intrigued about spiritualism, so that interested him in the writing of that particular novella. And then the final one is something like When the World Screams, and that's all about proving that the world is a living organism by hurting the world, which I was like, what? But that's so human to do something like that, I guess. That's why mankind sucks. But yeah, all in all, I enjoyed myself with some of these. I really disliked another, and I should have definitely put down The Land of Mist. But even with The Lost World, while I enjoyed it, it's also not something that I would never necessarily say that you need to read. And definitely also know that this book is also dated the way that I was talking about Jules Verne in the past 2 months. There is definitely sort of like white supremacy viewpoint within this, definitely within The Lost World, where they definitely make reference to the fact that white people are superior to other races. So do know that going into it as well. But so yeah, I've read it. I don't recommend. And then we're moving into the final book that I finished in the month of May, but finished is saying a lot because it's another DNF, and that is Unearthed or Briefly Gorgeous by Ocean Vuong. And I absolutely am so saddened by this one as well, because it's another one that I expected to be a 5-star read, and it was also one that I expected to be a super fast read, but it took me way too long to get to, I don't even know how far I got into this one. So I got 88 pages in. It took me 3 days to get those 88 pages in, and it definitely was work to get those 88 pages in. So Honored for Briefly Gorgeous is basically a fictional letter that our protagonist is writing to his mother. So his mother is Vietnamese, and she and her mother escaped Vietnam during or after the Vietnam War to go to the US, and so he is, I believe he was also born in Vietnam and then moved to the US, but maybe, no, I think he was also born in Vietnam. So it talks about the Vietnam War to some extent, and to the backlash that has had especially on his mother and his grandmother, the way that when they hear the fireworks on the 4th of July, for example, they kind of have a panic attack and they hide because they think that those sounds are bombs going off. It talks about, growing up being Asian in America. It talks about the difficult relationship that at times he had with his mother, and it also will talk about his exploration of his sexuality. Now, my main problem with this one is the writing style. This is extremely literary, flowery writing. Ocean Vuong is a poet. He has poetry works as well. This is his only, at this point, I think, fiction work out there. And you can definitely tell that he's a poet, and while individually speaking, a lot of his lines I really like, and I thought like, oh wow, that's like beautifully put into words. But as a whole, in a story, that just doesn't work that well for me. So this is kind of like what happened with Your Story, My Story by Connie Palman a few months ago. I just could not get through it. The language to me is a barrier to getting to the story in this case, and so it distracts from the story, it takes away from the story in my opinion, because I feel like it's more difficult for me to create a connection to the characters as a result. So I would absolutely love to read something more about the Vietnam War, because I actually don't really know too much about the Vietnam War, and so I really liked the sections about the Vietnam War within this one. But I think that there are better works for that, or better works for what I want out of that, than this one. I think the thematic that I introduced, that this book is talking about, is very interesting, but just not this execution, or not for me in any case. I'm sure that if you like a more put together writing style, if you like a more exuberant writing style, then this could be absolutely amazing for you. Then this was definitely something that I would highly encourage you to pick up. But if, like me, you're very much more a fan of basic writing, purple prose I think it's called, then this one might really be challenging and you might not make it through. But so yeah, with that, we've had it. Those are the books that I read in the month of May. I have in total now reduced my TBR down to 8 books to go in the month of June, and then I will be done with my TBR 0 project, and I'm all free again to buy books, read whatever I want without feeling guilty about the books that I've had on my shelves for years. So very much looking forward to that. And as I said, this month was a mixed bag, but I'm very happy that I've read my new favorite of the year so far, And the Mountains Echoed by Khaled Hosseini. And so let the competition begin. Let some other book push that off of its throne at this point in time. But so yeah, let me know how your month of June has been going. What is the best book that you have read this month, for example? And so with that, I'm gonna round up this video. Hope you guys enjoyed it, and see you guys for a future one. Bye!